Many of you know I'm Ted Helms. I'm the Executive Director of the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce. We always say that our mission is to promote trade and investment, but interestingly, there's very little we ever discuss about trade. And I think it's partly the fact that we've got some colleagues here from J.P. Morgan. One of their economists I heard say something to the effect that if you were to, on a comparable basis, measure a closed economy, that actually Brazil is behind North Korea. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, just quoting. So, in other words, Brazil has a long way to go, and we thought this was a very opportune moment to discuss this.
So, just very quickly, right? I mean, what you see there in the right-hand side is the share of trade done by Mercosur countries that corresponds to trade with its neighbors, with the other member countries. It's 13%. It's very disappointing, right? I mean, it was far from success. I mean, we are, you compare to the EU, where like 65% of the trade of EU countries is with other EU members. I mean, and the Asian countries, they trade 35% of the total trade with the other members of the free trade area. So we have a problem there. On top of that, if you look at all the other indicators of integration with the world economy, I mean, especially when you look at the non-commodity component of trade, both Argentina, Brazil, and the other countries too, are very stagnant. I mean, we have some individual success stories in some industries, but not as a whole. You also see that Brazil and Argentina remain in the club of the most closed economies, right? I mean, countries moving forward in terms of signing up preferential trading agreements, right? That's the line on top. That's for Latin America. I mean, you have the Pacific Alliance countries have at least 12 trading agreements with 60% or more of the world GDP, whereas in Mercosur we only have 8 trading agreements with 5% of the world GDP, right? So, and there is an issue because these trading agreements, it's not only that you get access to markets and you give access to markets, but also you lock in agreements on investment, on services, on intellectual property rights, on other things that are needed for trading, right? And even for facilitation of trade and customs. So we have an issue, and this is particularly deleterious for getting into global value chains.
Probably most companies in that area, rethinking their previous 15, 20 years, came to the conclusion that this closed environment didn't do very well. So you did not achieve amazing results because of these barriers. Effectively is more or less the opposite. You did worse than other regions where there was a more open space and a more integrated circumstance. Of the competitiveness for a country like Brazil and the remainder countries of Mercosur, especially Argentina, are fairly similar, are very big, and they will not be solved in a short period of time. They will need a long time to be fixed. To give you an example, and they become very simple when we talk about the so-called cost Brazil, custo Brasil, people say, what is this? If you think, for instance, in the auto part industry where I belong, we had a chance to map exactly what that means because some companies like mine, we do the same product in many countries. So we can really put in a spreadsheet and say, what is more expensive here than there? And to give you an idea, the number one item in an industry like auto parts is security. So to have a factory in Brazil, you need armed policemen in each door of your factory 24 hours per day, 7 days per week. If you go to the same, as in the Ioschpe case, you go to the German plant of Ioschpe, you don't know that you got in. There is no fence, there is no doorman, there is no armed doorman. If you go to Brazil, we need those guys armed 24 hours to make sure that our property is safe. The second item is the logistic story where there is a lot of loss for destruction, robbery, and the insurance policies are the most expensive in the world for this purpose, the logistics due to that. So to give you an example, in the auto parts sector, we lose around 1% of what we produce to take the good to the customer, either by destruction, robbery, or this differential in the insurance policy. In an activity where the good guys in the world make 3%, 4% net income, so more or less 25% of the benchmark net income you're losing to transport product to your customer. When I gave you the example of this intra-block drawback, means that we can import one part from Korea, for instance, at zero duty in Brazil, to put it in another part and send it to Argentina. But the contrary doesn't work. We cannot send anything at zero into Korea. So not only does it make sense, but we created a benefit for a third party for nothing, for no reciprocity. While when you do an agreement, there is a clear reciprocity. You both decrease duties and you run the risks and you have the opportunities for the two countries or the two regions or the multiple regions that belong to that agreement.
So just some background. In October of 2018, President Trump sent out a tweet saying that the U.S. and Brazil have significant trade issues. And then after that, the Undersecretary for Agriculture in charge of trade, Ted McKinney, said that the trade between Brazil and the U.S. has not been free, fair, and reciprocal. And that seems to be the mantra of the Trump administration, looking for free, fair, and reciprocal trade. That seems to be their perspective with lots of countries, not just with Brazil. And so we see from that the United States would like to negotiate with Brazil, but from their perspective, Brazil needs to enact these reforms that we've been talking about. And particularly, as you mentioned, the tariffs on the manufacturing sector. Recently, the USTR issued a report on Section 301. Section 301 is the provision that the Trump administration used to enact the tariffs on China, goods manufactured in China imported to the U.S. at 25% additional duty. It's a little-known provision of the Trade Act of 1974. Well, it's not so little known anymore, but it was. And to date, the Trump administration has used it on China, and then recently the president instructed the USTR to look into other countries, and he just issued a report. And Brazil is on a watch list for intellectual property issues. So we'll see what happens there. But the Trump administration is very interested in bilateral agreements, particularly interested in free trade agreements and particularly bilateral agreements. So then, as we know, Trump and Bolsonaro met in March of 2019, just a few months ago. Following the meeting, they issued a statement for a prosperity partnership where they actually agreed to reduce trade barriers between the countries. And we see that statement and that first meeting is sort of teeing up how the two of them will negotiate trade going forward.